Hello, I'm Annabelle Lee, and welcome back to another episode of the Talking Classical podcast. I'm so delighted to be welcoming on this episode Guy Johnston. Guy is one of Britain's leading cellists, who was the winner of the BBC's Young Musician of the Year competition back in 2000, which set him on a glittering international career as a soloist, chamber musician, orchestral player, and a teacher, notably at both the Royal Academy of Music in London, where he is a visiting professor, and his alma mater, Eastman School of Music in Rochester, USA, where he is an associate professor. This podcast was recorded the day after Guy had given 2 consecutive performances of Elgar's cello concerto at very short notice with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Mark Wigglesworth, having come for a short trip from the States to England. And we managed to cover a number of different topics over the short time we had, such as performing last-minute gigs, what it's like being a musical parent, growing up in a musical household, training in the States, Guy's new YouTube video series Creative Cello Chats, playing on a Stradivarius, and interpreting Bach, a composer which Guy has been a real exponent of.
Hi, Annabelle.
Hi! Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's so lovely to meet you, at least in virtually.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah. So you've been very busy, haven't you, this week?
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Tell me all about it.
Yeah, well, we were planning our chat with me across in the States and the time difference and all that, but it turns out I'm in the UK very unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And I got a call on Friday, just before the weekend, saying there's a chance you might be needed for an Elgar concerto with the Bournemouth Symphony. And so I kind of thought about it and thought, well, I'd love to go and play the Elgar. We can make this happen if I'm needed. And so through the weekend, I started preparing, and then on Monday morning, I woke up to an email saying, get to the airport. So I did, and I arrived on Tuesday, and almost as soon as I arrived in Poole, so I came from New York State and arrived in Poole in England and rehearsed almost immediately, and off we went, and we've just given 2 performances, and it's just been totally exhilarating and wonderful. And of course, yesterday coincided with Jacqueline Dupre's birthday. She would have been 78, so she was very present in my mind with that piece.
What is it like when you get these last-minute phone calls to play these gigs? Because, I mean, it must be something that is quite familiar for you as professional musicians, but at the same time, it must be, quite a buzz because you're not having to think about it for, months and months. You've just got to kind of do it, really.
Exactly. It was actually I can't think of another experience like that. I mean,
Really?
my wife was very supportive, and I left my little 18-month-old behind, and that was amazing. So I knew that I had the support to go and do it. And then it's a piece, thankfully, that I've played of all the concertos more than anything. And there was a buzz because I love returning home, and I love the piece, and the orchestra's very, very friendly and delightful. And it was the first time I was working with Mark Wigglesworth. So there were lots of things that sort of resonated and came together. But yeah, and then suddenly there we were, live streaming the first concert, and then last night in Portsmouth. But no, it was thrilling.
Yeah, and also, you must be just reeling off the jet lag as well. The adrenaline must just be getting you through the gig, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking about it. I mean, general exhaustion at the moment with having a little baby and waking up at all hours of the night and all that sort of thing. Well, she's not so bad anymore, but certainly early wake-up calls are. She says very few things, but one of the things she says is she'll go, up, now. She says, sure, can't really try and sleep more when you get the call from little Giulietta, but it's amazing the energy that you get from the music, from the musicians, from the audience, from the piece, just everything.
Wow. So I didn't realise that you were quite a new dad, because I was thinking of Izzy, actually, and she's, talked a lot about her experiences of being a musical parent and, what it's like having a baby. She's done a lot of, media coverage about that. So what is it like being a parent and a professional musician? And do you think that will your little one follow in your footsteps? Do you think she'll be a musical person like you? Or
who knows? I mean, I love playing for her. I love, amazingly, the other day, I didn't realize, but every time I was going to the piano, I would always start at middle C, and I'd say middle C. And, okay, Giulietta, where's middle C? And she kind of glided her hand over the keyboard and gradually whistled down to middle C.
Yeah.
And I was just so thrilled. And there's pieces that we put on that she loves, and she'll start getting very animated and dancing to. And then every time she comes into the room, if I'm practicing, I kind of stop what I'm doing and just try and either play a nursery rhyme or some Bach. And there's a particular, she loves the courant of the first suite. And she has this really cute little dance, but it's very special. And she actually has early childhood music lessons because I'm teaching. Part of what I do is this role at Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, which is where I was actually a student 20 years ago. And the most surreal part of it is not only going back and working next to my great mentor, Stephen Doan, but also the fact that I'd now take my daughter to early childhood music lessons in the room where I studied music history. It's just sort of bizarre. Never would have imagined.
Yeah. So what was it like growing up in a very musical household then? How did your musical experiences start when you were young then?
Yeah, music was all around me. Like we've just been saying with Chiquetta, I even put the radio on for her, but the radio was always playing. They were wind teachers. So my mum's a bassoonist and dad's a clarinetist. And they didn't want any wind players in the house because they didn't want to get too involved. But obviously they had a music school and students would come and have lessons. And then we would go and after school be at the music school and hear all the music going on. And we could try instruments in the music shop. And I played the tuba at one point. And we ended up singing at King's Choir because my eldest brother had this wonderful voice. And actually our uncle said to my parents, you should go and see if Rupert can get into one of these great choir schools. And he did. And then, of course, my other brother, Magnus, followed. And then I wanted to be like them. So I followed. And that was a great tradition. But Mum said to me, because I was trying to remember, how did I choose the cello? But it's so far back that I can't even remember necessarily the moment. But I apparently was most focused when I had the cello with me. So they just thought that was a good thing. And funnily enough, just this morning, my brother Magnus said his son Otto, who is about 5, probably similar age, suddenly said, I want to play the cello like Uncle Guy. Oh. So maybe it will continue on in the family. My uncle is an amateur cellist and my great-grandfather was an amateur cellist. And I played on his full-size cello for a while when I was big enough. I sort of wish I was an amateur cellist and not have to make a living out of it. But, there's something in the blood. So what was it then that steered you to the decision of becoming a professional then, rather than just staying on the amateur path? Yeah, so, obviously I was singing and then playing, every day I'd practice a little and often. And then in my last year at King's, when I was 13, my parents decided to send me to a teacher in London, Amanda Truelove, who studied with the wonderful pedagogue Joan Dixon, who was very famous in her day. I know a lot of people that studied with her, and one of which, Amanda Truelove, started teaching. And that gave me a little bit more of a bug, I was thinking, maybe I'd like to take this on from King's. So then we looked at music schools, actually, and I went up to Chetham's. And of course, that became more structured and disciplined with the practice. You had a few hours a day mapped out for your practice and then academic lessons and things. But really the moment that captured me, I think, was when I was 15 and my parents sent me off to Tanglewood in America. And literally just, see you later. Yeah. Go and have a great... My teacher, David Smith, from the Alberni Quartet, he said, Guy must get an experience studying abroad, wherever it is. It just needs another perspective. And so they followed through with that and they sent me off. And I'll never forget arriving because my mum had booked a taxi for me on arrival and someone to take me to the taxi. And it turned out to be a limousine. And she didn't realize she'd booked a limousine. She didn't mean to. But anyway, I felt very, my tail was up in this limousine and I turned up at Tanglewood and with my cello. First time really traveling abroad with my cello. And that was an incredible festival because the Boston Symphony Orchestra were in residence and they had every great soloist and chamber group sort of coming through over the course of 8 weeks. And I was playing chamber music, orchestral music, having some solo lessons. And I thought when I got back, I just thought, wow, it gave so much energy. I loved the enthusiasm and what I was hearing and that, it just propelled me. And then, of course, I went to study in the States and now I'm kind of part of what I do is teaching there. So I guess the States has had quite a kind of influence and impact on my life. So I know you said that your teacher, one of your mentors, encouraged you to go and study abroad. But were there any other particular reasons why you chose to study over in America as opposed to staying in the UK? Yeah, I had heard about Stephen Doan. A few of my teachers all studied with the same woman, Jane Cowan. And I was studying at that, before I made the decision to go to America with Nicholas Jones, who's the head of strings at Chetham's. And he studied with Jane Cowan. And my great hero was Stephen Islis, and he studied with Jane Caron. And then I was hearing about Steve Jones. I thought, well, he'll have similar concepts and ideas around the playing. And I think Nick really encouraged me to go and have a lesson with him. And at that point, he was teaching a bit in London and in America because he's married to an English wife. And just around that time, he was moving to America full time. So he said, come and see Eastman School of Music and see how you feel. And if it's right for you, then there's a place waiting for you in my class. So I thought, wow, let's go and try it. And at the same time, I was waiting to hear whether I'd got into Ralph Kirschbaum's class, another American Texan, but he was teaching at the Royal Northern at that point, just up the road from Chetham's. I think we had to make the decision at different times for America and England colleges. And basically, I decided once I was at Eastman and I'd had that experience again, I really wanted to go abroad and study with Steve. And then I got back to an answer phone message saying from Ralph, you've got the one place in my class. And I was like, what a nightmare. What do I do? But the amazing thing was when I finished at Eastman, I actually went back to live in London and studied privately with Ralph, which I think was the right way round. And it all worked out in the end.
What is the training like in America compared to UK?
Certainly from the Eastman perspective, it's incredibly structured. If you miss a lecture, like in music history or the oral or the humanities classes that you had to take, the theory was huge. Your grade point average would reduce. And so if you get to a certain point, your scholarship starts to reduce as well. So there was a great incentive to make sure you went to everything, whether you liked it or not. And as a student, you don't realize how valuable all this training is. But I loved the rigor of the classes, I must say. And then, the professors that teach there they have salaried jobs and they take it seriously. And there are all sorts of benefits and things that make you value the community and want to work hard. And so there's a kind of culture there. It's quite different. Whereas I would say from what I've seen in the UK, for example, you have a choice if you go to the lectures or not. You've got more independence, especially in a big city like London. You make your own arrangement with your teacher. There's not necessarily the same structure. There's more sort of gigging involved and you're already maybe already at a different level at the start of college in the UK than I've seen perhaps in America. But they work hard, and because they're paying these big fees to go to university and college in the States when there's not always the scholarship available, they value their work ethic. It's really important to them. So I really benefited, I think, from that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's so lovely that I can have you on. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because I came across those fantastic Creative Cello Chats. And it's so great to see musicians like you stepping over into this whole content creation world, podcasting. So welcome. Tell me about how they came about. I mean, they're such a wonderful resource. You said that they were initially for your students, but then you decided to open them up to the general public.
Yeah, exactly. What is it? Sharing is caring. No, it's really a passion of mine. And I think that whatever I do in the future, I think education will always be the sort of backbone to what I'm doing. And I found that what's been fascinating about the last 5 years since I've been teaching over in America is that I bizarrely have managed to catch up with things I'd wished to do when I was a student at Eastman. I won the BBC competition when I was 19. And so I was going through a kind of major shift in my professional life at the same time as studying. And it definitely created some tension. I didn't have the space I necessarily needed looking back at just growing and evolving naturally. I was kind of catapulted in a way. Although that's what I wanted to do, I just think looking at things now, I'm just so grateful for this opportunity to work with the students and consider things and hear their questions and think about things and read all these extraordinary manuals that are available to us. So you learn so much just delving into all this material. And through COVID, I had a lot of time to do that. And, the Popper Etudes became a friend, and every day in the Bach suites. And then I would be learning repertoire that I wasn't necessarily going to perform, but have wanted to tuck into. So I suddenly had all this space. And I think that thoughts have been evolving and deepening. And I am only too happy to start sharing ideas when they come to me. I've got a whole notes on my phone where I think of something and I think, that might be nice to discuss at some point on my Creative Cello Chat. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking forward to doing more and more of that and balancing what I do with my role there with my playing. It's important to get the right balance because actually you can talk about all these things, but the reality of being in the moment and performing is something totally unique. And that's where you really, really learn, I think. But anyway, there's lots of things to consider and geek out about, and it's kind of fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question then. So what does a creative cello mean to you?
Yeah. I was trying to think of a title. I asked a friend, I said, what would you come up with? But I think what I like about it, it keeps options open, and it can sort of expand to any kind of which way. And I try and balance the content with experiences I'm having now, things that I've learned in the past, or things that I'm thinking about that I think relate to everybody in some way. And yeah, it's a journey, and it's kind of an improvisation in a way.
Yeah. And what have you learned from doing these chats so far? You've talked about a lot of different topics. I know you had one with Sheku, and you talked about just creativity and transferable skills, and then one with Stephen Isserlis and Stephen Dunn about mentors. Yeah. Any key takeaways so far? Or?
Oh, I just love the fact that these all happened, and that people are only too happy to share in their stories. And thankfully, I've kept in touch with these old mentors and friends and colleagues, and there are other people I'd love to reach out to. But it's just such a joy to get perspectives and to be in touch with your colleagues and mentors and friends. I mean, it just keeps you feeling like you're in contact with a kind of history, the past, because talking with Steve and Stephen about their teacher, Jane Cowan, who I mentioned earlier, she was great connected to the Casals and Foyman and other great artists that we hear about. I'm worried to say people are even forgetting about in the modern day. And I think that somehow we've got to keep that thread going. And I've put, I think, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants was underneath in the little title in Creative Cello, and actually just being mindful of where you've come from and where our cello has grown up from, the bass all the way up to the gods, the higher registers, in understanding our role and what's important in the 21st century with the cello. What's our existence about? And what should we be doing? I mean, I love commissioning new pieces and playing the old traditional war horses. And, I'm thinking of ideas at the moment about recordings and what I can do in the coming years. And you think to yourself, gosh, there's been so many interpretations, why another one? Mm-hmm. But actually, there's room for all these different interpretations. And it's fascinating to see the way social media and other forms of communication are changing the way that we're all communicating and planning and programming and so on. So it's kind of thrilling.
Fantastic. Well, I know that in an email that you sent me, that I know that you have now got a Stradivarius, which is very exciting. Tell me all about that, and how did that transition from your Tekla cello to Stradivarius come about? I mean, it's something of an ultimatum, isn't it, for all string players that they want to play on a Stradivarius. So did you notice that? Has it actually made a massive difference to your playing and how you approach repertoire and playing and all of that?
Oh my goodness, great questions. I think that maybe just while I'm thinking about it, I think what I've learned from arriving at a Stradivarius is that whilst that's the most incredible feeling and fascinating kind of new world, at the end of the day, it's really what you carry internally inside what you do, which is most important, regardless of what instrument you're playing on. Because I remember this feeling when it had all happened, and I can tell the story in just a moment, but that I felt like, gosh, I'd always imagined that. I'd always dreamt of something like that. And now it's arrived, but now what,
Yeah. You reach the ultimate and then you think, oh, you're never going to be satisfied, are you?
It's not the answer. You've not arrived. Exactly. It's just another part of the journey. And what a responsibility and what an incredible opportunity, And but really the whole story is just completely bonkers, because I was never in a position to even contemplate it at the time. We just had Baby Giacchetta in America. And 2 weeks later, I was due to go to England to play 5 weeks of concerts, including a prom and a Wigmore and all these lovely concerts. And I remember saying to my wife, Ali, maybe I should just stay put. We've just had this life event. Why would I leave you both now? And she's like, you've got to go. You've got to keep everything on track. Don't worry. And we had a nanny to help and so on. So I went and I stayed with an influential sponsor in London, and I played a house concert. And after everyone had left that evening, I just jokingly said to this person, bows are much cheaper than instruments, because I know they had bought quite a number of instruments for young musicians and were supporting people. And so they said, do you want to go and have a look for one? I said, well, I'm going into Beers tomorrow in London to get my bow reheard. I could try some. So I did. I went in and I think they laid out 10 bows. Didn't tell me what they were.
Okay.
And of course, I happened upon the most expensive, extraordinary, beautiful Francois Tourt bow. And of course, he was the founder of modern bow making. He was like the Stradivarius of bow making. And so I was thrilled. And after 5 weeks of the concerts and things, she said, right, I think we should get this. So we went back into Beers and we signed some papers. And when we were there, they said, oh, just so you know, a Stradivarius cello has just come in. It's in the vault downstairs. Do you want to try it? And I said almost immediately, no. And the sponsor also said, I'm sorry, I'm not investing at this time in an instrument like this or this value. And so we left.
Why did you say no rather than?
Because I've been similar places before and my heart was dashed. And it's just like, why go down that path when I've just found a beautiful bow for my Tekla cello, which I was playing on then. And I'm focused on that right now. Right. And this is ridiculous, Anyway, they called me up when I got home back to on my mobile. And they said, Guy, you're about to go back to the States. You really should just take the cello with you and see how you get on. And then if you're going to find investors anywhere, it's going to be America. Just take it. And so I thought, well, okay, let's do this. And 6 months later, through various connections and weird, wonderful routes that we took, we landed on a person who was only too happy to help and was thrilled to be a part of it, and is just the most delightful person and supporter of the arts, and was just looking at that moment to take money out of the stock market because it was not doing so great. And she'd heard of the Stradivarius. And so we landed on this moment. And to this day, I can't believe how it all happened. I said to Ali, it was a bit like when I met her, I wasn't looking at the time. And it just sort of happened.
Yeah.
So I sort of feel like these things are meant to be. And now I have it's crazy. I have another Tourt bow, which I then, both of them bring out different qualities in the instrument. But it was an investor that could have invested in the Strad who didn't in the end because this other person decided they wanted to own the whole thing outright, which makes it much cleaner, I suppose, and less complicated. And so this other investor said, well, what else could we potentially put money into? And I said, well, let me look for another bow and just have fun with that. And that's what happened. So I'm just so fortunate. And it has given me a sense of purpose. And, I couldn't be more excited really about this next chapter.
Yeah. So are you playing both the Tekla and the Stradivarius cellos in conjunction with each other, or are you now exclusively playing the Stradivarius?
Yeah, the Tekla, I had to let go of that because it's part of a trust.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Yeah, I think it's now being played by a cellist in a quartet who's only too happy. I mean, it's a beautiful instrument, and it was just a joy to have that for 10 years. And I think, there are many instruments out there and many opportunities and experiences. So this is just another one. And for the last year since I've had it, I've been exploring the setup. It's had a new fingerboard. It's had new neck, things that needed to be updated. And it basically has been restored to full health. And the other day I went to get the sound post adjusted and they could barely move the sound post. So they took it to the workbench upstairs and I heard this big blow. It's like dentist or something. It's horrendous. Anyway, it came back down and we did one more little tweak. And suddenly the soul of the instrument revealed itself. I was like, now I feel part of the sound now. This is exactly what I've been looking for. So it's been a journey and it's been fun. And it keeps going. Yeah.
And is that steel strings or are they steel covered gut strings? Because
I've done both, but at the moment I'm on steel. But I'm tempted to try the covered gut.
Yeah, because I read somewhere that do you exclusively play on steel covered gut strings, or you play on metal as well, or both? Or?
I did for a while because all my mentors. The other mentor I meant to mention is David Waterman from the Endelian Quartet. He also studied with Jane Cowan, and when I went to IMS Prussia Cove back in the day, I studied with both Stephen and David. And whenever I went to London, I would always go and play to David because Stephen Islis was always off performing. Sometimes I was able to go and play for him. And then Steve Doan and so on. But so they all play on guts, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
But and I love the quality of them. The strings are kind of fatter, they're rubbery. The quality of the sound is just a whole nother colour that you can explore. But you do suffer a little bit on projection, but I think you gain elsewhere. I mean, they're more temperamental. They're a bit more human. You can get away with murder on metal strings, but the kind of philosophy or what Stephen would say, holistic or idealistic world, that's part of them and their playing and the bowing technique, this kind of idea of circular bowing and angled bowing. You have to catch the covered gut or gut strings at the right angle in order for it to speak well. Whereas with metal, you can get away with that. So there's a very sort of natural, you have to be natural. If you force on the string, it doesn't speak, it doesn't carry, it doesn't live. And even in that interview with Stephen, when the camera wasn't rolling, we were chatting, we were talking about cellos, because I sometimes play on his Montagnana when I've had the odd concert when I couldn't bring the cello back over or something.
Right.
I was saying the Montagnana feels in a really good place at the moment. And he says, yeah, well, as long as we let these instruments breathe. And I like the way he's talked about that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you were talking about Bach earlier with your daughter and saying how much she loves the Courants, and you had the pleasure of studying Bach under Anna Bilsma. And I mean, what amazing experiences it must have been. And you've become, a bit of an exponent of Bach. Would you tell us a bit more about what that experience of studying with Anna was like, and maybe Jane Cowan, and what did you learn from those experiences?
Well, actually, I never met Jane Cowan. I only learned...
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, all her philosophy and playing and everything, which goes back to Casals and all these guys, went through Steve and David, the other Steve,
right.
and all characters. But with Anna Bilsma, I was so fortunate because actually Stephen said, I was searching at the time and wanted to go and play for someone. I think it's really important when you're starting out on your journey that when you graduate, you don't just suddenly think, okay, I'm on my own. And so actually I went also to Bernard Greenhouse, who studied with Casals, and he was living in Cape Cod. So I'm going off at a tangent here, but just before I forget to mention him, that was an amazing experience because he played in the Beaux-Arts trio, and we used to listen to recordings into the night, and there'd be the odd cellist staying with him, and it was just very special. Actually, he played on a Strad, and I remember thinking, and he let me play on it, in the nighttime, and so that was my first experience of tasting a Stradivarius. But coming back to Anna Bilsma, that was the lucky thing. I was doing some concerts in Amsterdam and working with the Sinfonietta there, and in the periods that I was there over like 5 years, each time I went there, I would go and play a suite to Anna. And I even took some of my students at the time from the Royal Academy of Music to go and have lessons as well. And it was just amazing because obviously he's recorded them quite a few times and they're quite different. Later in life, he stopped playing. So he started thinking a lot more about them. And he started really investigating the Anna Magdalena score and source and trying to be true to those articulations that you see there. But he came up with a logic about those, what some people would say are haphazard bowings, but which Anna gave a very compelling narrative about how actually Bach was trying to do something different for the cello suites to the violent partitas, and we should really observe these bowings and take them quite seriously. And the thing about them is some of the logic that I can think on the top of my head are, usually the slurs are no more than 2, 3, or 4 notes. There are instances where they're joined up much more, but there's also a lot more separation. And the reason he came up with for the slurs being 2, 3, or 4, it's usually when the hand had to move, there would be a separation. So the logic was the coordination of the hands and the timing of the slurs and things. Yeah. He also felt that there was a kind of inner logic about the slurs that created a certain rhythmic structure, a certain pattern, which was quite interesting to observe. He just felt that, he said, people join up all the notes these days, and it's as if they're singing about themselves, And he really encouraged the more spoken playing, the more separation, the better. I mean, his books, one is called The Fencing Master. You have to be much more agile and coordinated. It's harder to memorize, if not impossible, because the bowings never stay the same. That was the other thing. The patterns are always changing. So the bow would be upside down in the bowing, and other times you'd be normally starting a down bow, but other times you were upside down. And again, for the narrative and the kind of speaking quality, it feels, whenever I get students to try it and then go back to the bowings they'd studied from another source, they miss the articulations and the kind of quirks and the differences. But there are moments when it is complicated and it potentially gets in the way. But Bach he didn't have a position at this point. He was exploring instrumentation. He played the sort of large viola that went off, or small cello that went off the shoulder, the Spalla.
Yeah.
And so maybe he was just there jotting ideas down whilst he was trying them. And so anyway, they were busy. They had lots of children. And when Anna was copying the score, thankfully, because the original doesn't exist, she was probably distracted and doing quick, let's just quickly do that. And, and it could be that she just was not being absolutely true to the score. Maybe she thought, they'll know what we mean when we do that gesture or that gesture. And there is actually a version that came out, I think, I can't remember which edition now, where a couple of musicologists decided to compare the cello suites with the violin suites and the partitas. And they tried to integrate what could have been meant by the slurs from the partitas, looking at Bach's own hand in the partitas. So that's quite interesting. I look at that one as well, and it is less complicated, but again, and it had a very powerful influence on me. And then at the very end, when I took the 5th and 6th suite to him, he got quite cross. He said, "Have you not been reading my books?" And I said, "Well, yes, but I'm so sorry. And I haven't tuned the 5th suite down yet. And I haven't got 5 strings for the 6th suite. I haven't tried it yet, but I really want to get your take anyway." He said, "Well, what's the point if we don't have the kind of authentic, to work with?" And he was kind of getting a bit tired and fed up.
It must have been his ill health kicking in as well.
Absolutely. And only a few weeks later, he passed away. And I think it was but amazingly, he just said, "Come on, let's have a glass of wine and let's talk about the suites and other things." So I think, it wasn't the way I would have hoped to complete the series, but I've got all these notes from the other suites, which I just adore passing on to the students. And he had all these amazing analogies and concepts for the emotional content in the music. He would come up with really powerful imagery, and he always said, "Don't forget this was written during the Enlightenment." There's all sorts of different ways of interpreting them, and obviously they're kind of the holy grail for us cellists, but it's an ongoing study, these sacred suites.
You never stop learning. Thank you so much, Guy. It's been so wonderful talking to you. Thank you. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Well, thank you very much. I hope I haven't gone on too much, but I really appreciate being able to speak with you. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Talking Classical podcast. I do hope you enjoyed listening. Don't forget you can subscribe to the podcast on Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or other major outlets where you get your podcasts. You can also follow the Talking Classical podcast on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or the Talking Classical blog. If you have a moment, please would you leave a review or a rating on Apple Podcasts, as this will help to increase visibility and get the podcast to more people. Many thanks for listening once again, and I hope that you'll be able to join me for another podcast very soon. Bye for now.